Hi, everybody. Welcome. Glad to add my welcome to Jessica's. Some of you, this webinar is organized by Ashby Village, co-sponsored by Berkeley Friends Meeting, and we're extremely proud to be sponsoring this event and organizing it. It's important, and it's a creative way to bring this issue together, and we're really thrilled to be doing it. It's part of Ashby Village's overall commitment to engage and educate and activate older adults and our whole community. That's part of what we're about. We're a membership organization of hundreds of older adults in the East Bay supporting each other to age in place and to have like active and vibrant lives while living at home as we age. And we have many friends, volunteers, friends, supporters, et cetera. It's a big community. And especially if this is your first time at one of our events, special welcome to you. We provide these events free of charge. Glad to do it, proud to do it. And we also welcome your support. If you would like to make a donation to Ashby Village so we can continue doing this kind of programming and sustaining our organization, please feel free. I think there's going to be a link in the chat if there isn't one already. There you go. We welcome your support. This particular event was organized by Ashby Village's Elder Action Group, extremely important and very active group doing many high quality, important programs in the community. And I am really glad to turn it over at this point to Judy Appel, Ashby Village board member, active member of Elder Action, who has played the key role in pulling this together. And we'll take it from here. So thank you, Judy.
Thank you, Avi. I really am excited to be doing this panel, to be facilitating it, and I'm really happy so many of you are interested. And I'm really grateful to our amazing panelists. We have a really rich group today. So I am going to go ahead, and each one is prepared to do about a 5-minute introduction. So first I'm going to tell you who they are, and then I'll begin to call on them. Well, I'll just call on them and you can introduce yourselves. So first we have Kitty Calavita.
Thank you so much. This is such a timely and important forum, and I thank the Ashby Village and the Berkeley Friends Meeting for putting this together. I'm a retired professor of criminology, law, and society at UC Irvine, and I moved to Berkeley in 2010. And beginning in 2018, I was on the Police Review Commission of Berkeley, and I'm now on the Police Accountability Board for Berkeley. So in the brief time I have, I'll talk mostly about the two organizations I've been part of, the Police Accountability Board, which I'll call the PAB sometimes, as well as the Mayor's Working Group on Fair and Impartial Policing. I have to be clear at the start that I'm not speaking for the PAB, but as a resident of Berkeley with some knowledge of prospects for reform. So let me start with the Fair and Impartial Working Group. This group was put together by Mayor Arreguín in 2019 in response to Berkeley Police Department data that revealed, could you put up slide 1, please? So these data revealed, as you can see from this, that Black drivers in Berkeley were almost 8 times more likely to be stopped than white drivers. Next slide. And 4 times more likely to be searched once stopped. Next slide. Even though white drivers who were stopped and searched were more likely to end up with tickets or arrests than were people of color. There were also disparities for Latinx drivers. So the working group included Mayor Arreguín and Council Member Kate Harrison, who's been an important leader on police reform in Berkeley, as well as then Police Chief Greenwood, who I was happy to work with when I was on the Police Review Commission, and a diverse group of residents and stakeholders. Next slide. The recommendations we presented to council from that working group included: 1, restricting traffic stops to infractions that impact safety, with the understanding that a new BERC entity would in the future be responsible for traffic enforcement. 2, setting up an early intervention system in the police department that can identify officers who are outliers in the department with regard to racial disparities and some other issues, as well as revealing any patterns in the department and addressing these with appropriate resources. 3, intensifying crisis intervention training within the department, as well as implicit bias training. 4, setting up a specialized care unit outside the department to deal with mental health crises, and a host of other reforms. City Council unanimously approved this package of recommendations last February, so it's been almost a year now. Next slide. As council mandated, the PAB is responsible for overseeing implementation of these working group reforms. And I chair the implementation subcommittee within the PAB, and we hold regular public meetings to which all of you are invited. That's one good way to get involved. Change is hard, but I think all stakeholders want to see this happen. In any case, the PAB has new powers provided to us from the charter amendment that voters overwhelmingly passed in 2020, which will allow for more police department transparency. So reform can also come from ordinary people who file complaints over alleged police misconduct or policies they consider discriminatory or inappropriate. And one of the major functions of the PAB is to investigate those complaints. And the board and staff of PAB investigate them thoroughly. And they can have lasting impacts, sometimes with policy shifts, sometimes with officer discipline, and sometimes with calls for increased training. Next slide. Finally, I want to mention the Berkeley Task Force on Reimagining Public Safety, which I'm not a part of, but I keep in the loop on. This is a task force that was arranged by the City Council in Berkeley, and it's led by a consultants group and a community task force, which has been analyzing how to enhance public safety. They've held community forums and meetings. Maybe you've been to some of those. They've analyzed the city auditor's study of 911 calls to police in Berkeley. They've studied alternative models of safety across the United States. And the consultants have recently issued their final report. And here are some of their recommendations, many of which overlap with the mayor's working group recommendations I just shared with you. At the heart of their proposal is a community emergency response network, otherwise called CERN, C-E-R-N, that would replace the current 911 system with a tiered system, with only some calls resulting in a law enforcement response. And by the way, that task force will be meeting tonight in a public meeting beginning at 6 o'clock if you're interested in attending. They're wrapping up their business. It'd be an important time to go tonight to have your voices heard. In concluding, I just want to say again how much I appreciate the Ashby Village and the Berkeley Friends Meeting for sponsoring this panel. And the focus is on alternatives to armed police response. Even as some types of crimes increase in Berkeley, as across the country, we need to resist the temptation to resort to the same old responses like the war on drugs or turning to jails and prisons as the answer. Because those so-called solutions in the past have failed, sometimes pretty disastrously, and have increased racial discrimination, especially the war on drugs. And
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry.
So just one more thing, we have to work together to create a public safety model that benefits everyone. So I encourage you all to get involved and show up at these meetings I've mentioned to make your voices heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kitty. And there's a couple things that I did want to say, which I kind of skipped over because I was so excited to get started. But I did want to mention that although this was called a Bay Area overview, it's actually the East Bay. So we have representatives from Berkeley, Richmond, and Oakland. And then one of the things that people will be talking about is the response to calls when mental health ends up being an issue in the call. So, kind of what's being worked out in these new reforms to be able to address mental health issues. So, and we brought in a broad group of people, so we have a lot of different perspectives. And next I'm going to call on, I might be saying your name wrong, Amy Couture, who is a family member of somebody who was arrested as a part of this process and a mental health advocate.
I want to thank the Ashby Village for definitely having this wonderful panel to discuss this very difficult topic. I would like to read my intro because it's very personal and intentional, and because this is a live thing that I'm experiencing with my loved one. It's very emotional. But I want to be clear, based upon my study of quantum physics, neuro and other sciences, permaculture, regenerative design, and spiritual and meditative practices and principles, I would like to introduce myself first as ever-expanding conscious, loving awareness informing itself and joining with your conscious awareness in this present time, space, reality to be on the cutting edge of turning into the vibrations of love and above as we turn thoughts into things to intentionally create regenerative, interconnected systems that support conscious expansion of our connection to one source that we are all connected to. My name is Amy Couture, living this temporary race, age, and gender assignment. I've raised my family and have lived and worked here in the East Bay for over 30 years. At this point, I like to think of this as abolition work because I believe that keeping people in a cage without access to all that makes an environment healthy is what is making this system fail and perpetrating further harm to individuals, families, and the communities as it wastes countless public and natural resources. And that's why it needs to be abolished. I also believe in accountability. Since 2004, when my loved one became entangled in the criminal justice mental health system in Alameda County and within the state of California, due to court-mandated treatment programs, I have accumulated numerous paper and electronic records of the care and advocacy I have attempted for them over the last 15 plus years during their shuffle through court hearings, board and cares, locked settings, homelessness, as I've spoken before council boards, written to the state, written to the judges. So I've spent countless hours researching holistic treatments and diagnosis for brain disorders, trying to piece my loved one's genetic history together, only to later learn that the science of epigenetics is replacing gene determinism, saying that the environment causes genes to express. The environment we bathe our genes in is making us sick or making us healthy. Presently, my loved one was transferred to Napa State Hospital in December for their third incompetent to stand trial in about 10 years. Shortly after I discovered that another detainee was found dead on the same unit that he was just transferred from. I have spent a small fortune seeking nutritional, genetic, and other alternative therapeutic treatments to support them. I know my children's history pre-conception. That's why I share my evolving perspective to offer a look into the humanity of people who might be experiencing altered states and the validity of their altered states and how acceptance, compassion, kindness, caring for their physical, mental, and social and spiritual well-being can be a sure way to de-escalate any situation. How do I know this? Because I've been practicing de-escalating my own nervous system from the fear that this society and that my own psychotic altered loved one has has brought to the situation. So I want to share these things and my experience, and I'm thankful to participate in this discussion and to broaden the possibilities to look at how we can become more in harmony with ourselves, with others, and with nature. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amy. And I hope you'll have an opportunity later on to share what happened, because I think that would be good for people to hear, if you feel comfortable.
Okay, be more specific about what you're saying. What happened? So much has happened.
I'm sorry. Maybe share what happened with your son. So next I'm going to call on Andrew Greenwood, who's the retired Berkeley police chief. So Andy, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you very much. My name is Andy Greenwood. I was born and raised in Berkeley and served for 35 years on the police department. I retired last March. And I appreciate the invitation to this panel, and just hope to provide perspective that I hope is helpful for the panel and for your audience, for the folks watching this, as they consider the topic of reform, the various topics within that affect our profession, and my own kind of advocacy to really look carefully at reform as a local matter. There are, I think, 18,000 police departments across the country, and one of the principal things to remember is that each police department has its own set of regulations and policies, but also has its own history and its own culture. And I think the most effective reform needs to come down at that local level, where people are interacting constructively with each other to address issues that may exist within that department, as opposed to larger issues across the country, which, if they're concerned, we should be looking at our department and at our history to see if those issues exist in our agency. So policing is just a very local matter. I mean, for example, I still read occasionally where an agency somewhere is prohibiting the carotid restraint, which was prohibited, which is a concern. And then when people look into it, they find out it was prohibited in Berkeley in 1985. You might read about police pursuits being limited to matters of where there's violence and particular danger. And in the 90s, the Berkeley Police Department narrowed its pursuit policy. More recently, around de-escalation in 2015, our department had the first state-mandated de-escalation, 8-hour de-escalation training for officers that included not only classroom lecture, reviewing video of incidents from around the country involving folks who are escalated and tactics to de-escalate those, and then concluding with hours of role training involving role players. So officers and supervisors had opportunities to move through scenarios to put into practice the things they've been talking about in the early part of the class. So as an example, and then of course the theme of the panel, one of the primary things is police response to mental health crises. And that's extremely important. In Berkeley, the police department's been working with mobile crisis team, trained non-police professionals who have been participating in calls for service with the police responding. And I think the way forward, we know it, I think should involve an expansion of that kind of approach. And I believe that community members are working on that now. My feeling has always been, I first am concerned about safety, and to the extent that everybody involved can be safe, particularly on the front end, then creating opportunities for trained mental health professionals to be involved is really important. So that's just touching on a couple of kind of reform issues that have national attention, but that are being addressed locally. And I guess my own disclaimer is, I retired almost a year ago, and I'm speaking for myself here as a Berkeley resident and with the experience of 35 years in policing in Berkeley. So thank you very much. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Chief Greenwood. And next, I would like to ask Richmond Council Member Claudia Jimenez to speak and introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you so much for this timely discussion about this important topic. I am Claudia Jimenez. I am newly elected. I am I was elected in 2020. Started my city council position in January of 2021. So I have been here for a year in my position as a Richmond City Council. I am also a community organizer who has been working on criminal justice issues and immigrant rights issues in Richmond, Contra Costa, and in collaboration with other networks at the state level. One thing that I did, and I'm glad that Zack Norris is here because we worked together. He was Ella Baker Center's did an amazing job supporting the Contra Costa Racial Justice Coalition, which was a coalition of many organizations in the immigrant, particularly the undocumented community and the Black community in Contra Costa counties to really redirect resources. So we were the first county with through the Invest in People No Prison campaign to redirect $5.2 million from AB 109 that was coming directly to the sheriff department, the DA department in Contra Costa County, and redirected to services for those coming home from incarceration, as well as stop the collaboration that the sheriff Livingston was having with ICE through the security communities program at that time. So that was a win-win, but then we started working in other things like stopping a jail expansion in Richmond because at the time the county was closing the only full service hospital that we have in West County by saying that there wasn't money for it. And at the same time, they were saying, yeah, but there is money to incarcerate our folks and expand the jail that we have in Richmond. So that was a really bad message in terms of like saying, we don't care about you. We just want to aid you. And that was a fight that we kept going for many years. And we kept every year organizing because every year the sheriff was changing the way that he was trying to scale. And every year we organize. But I remember the fourth year, and we kept winning and winning until the fourth year when they said that it was going to be a mental health institutions in the jail, and they have more services. Not saying that we are against services in the jail, but we understood that it wasn't about that. It was more about just putting more money into the criminal justice systems in a ways that hasn't been really effective. Because the rate of recidivism was high, it wasn't changed, and putting money in the same system that is failing to address what we want to address wasn't the right way to do. But we lost because we have a very conservative board of supervisors. Only our supervisor in West County, John Joya, was the one who voted against it. The rest voted for expanding the jail. And that was one of the reasons, besides other reasons and people asking me to run, but I decided to run because I had seen how the community organizations has been working on issues to reform the police, to do reforms. And when you elect people who are no fighting or no pushing the community agenda, the social and racial justice agenda, then you have in one meeting to dismantle the years and years of community organizing. So, and in Richmond, I just, to finish, and I will hope that I will talk more about what we had been doing in Richmond. And Richmond last year, through the budget process, we were able to reallocate money from the police department into 4 programs. That was a very controversial thing, but I think we need to start thinking about what public safety mean for us. And in a society and in a city where resources has been scarce, obviously everybody thinks that the police is the only left service that had been here to resolve every single thing, to resolve neighborhood disputes, to resolve mental health crisis, and many other things that otherwise we can serve with in a better way with other approaches. So we were able to reallocate money. And what I am going to say is that even though this is a local issue about that, yes, we recognize Richmond police department in Richmond had changed substantially. It had been like, I am not saying we came long way. But there are some things that are general, and if you look not only Richmond but other parties, that the way that we had been putting money into things in our society has been really unbalanced. So when you look at Richmond, and I'm sure other cities, right, Berkeley, other cities. In our city, for instance, like 39% of the budget goes to one department, the police department. And then another 20 something, 23 to the fire department. So you get left with 40% to get 7% to, only 7% to the libraries. To address infrastructure, parks, youth centers, all of the other services that make the city safer. And that is the thing that we need to address, because it's not only a problem in one locality, right? So what we were doing was to start looking at what makes us safe and how we can redirect some of these resources to better serve our community and improve public safety. And I will talk more later about what we did. So thank you, happy to be here.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Jimenez. Next, I'm going to call on the Vice Mayor of Oakland, Rebecca Kaplan.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much. It is an honor to be with you and also get to share in this conversation with some of my colleagues throughout our region. So thank you, Councilmember Jimenez, as well, because many of us are grappling with very similar issues. And so I really want to thank all of the organizers and hosts of today's event, because part of how we build solidarity requires recognizing how many of us are grappling with similar problems so that we can work together on solutions. And we have been struggling with the fact that the overwhelming majority of the federal budget goes to weapons of war, and that on the local level, all of our cities have had underfunding in some of the core needs that create a safe and thriving society. My name's Rebecca Kaplan. As mentioned, I'm the city council member at large and vice mayor of the city of Oakland. So I represent the entire city. And I've been working on these issues for many years, including even before serving in elective office. I went to Stanford Law School, where I had the honor to study with Michelle Alexander, author of The New Jim Crow. And I worked as a legal intern at Prisoner Legal Services. And in my work as an activist and community advocate, I also wrote the first successful ballot measure in America to end the war on cannabis and move to a regulated public approach to take that out of the criminal system. And so when we look at the overlapping problems we have of the underfunding of the core services and the issues of police conduct, I see them as intertwined. The fact that people say, well, I saw someone out, they were drunk or they were having a mental health issue. And, you know, I had to choose between either calling the police or calling no one. And they feel bad about both of those options. And so the fact that the police is given as the only option contributes to why we see so many problems. And many of the instances of police officers killing people in a situation where they were unarmed and there was no threat arise from situations where they are called to respond to a mental health situation, a homeless situation, or some other situation which really doesn't need an armed officer to respond. And so some of the things that we have been working on and that I have helped bring forward in Oakland, I put a link in the chat to some coverage of our work to launch MACRO, which is what we in Oakland are calling our civilian responder program. And this is an internal program in our fire department, which also then has access to a 911 dispatch. And these will be ongoing city employees who can be well trained in civilian crisis response. And the purpose of this is to ensure that there is that other option, that people aren't told you have to only call the police or call nobody when you see someone in a form of distress that is not a violent crime. And so this is an incredibly important effort. I think it's important to recognize when this came from a strong grassroots community push. This isn't something that was just made up by council members. I was the council member who introduced it, but that came out of extensive grassroots organizing and community work that went into making that happen. And when I first introduced it, the mayor and the administration mocked it and tried to portray it as an extremist thing to even allow there to be an alternative response for these vital needs. And it was a big fight. But we passed the funding for the initial study that laid out the design of the program. And then we passed the money to launch the program. And then we worked with the state and hat tip to Nancy Skinner to get state funding to really strengthen it and have the level of responders that we're now launching in Oakland to do this work. And this is really important to be able to build a more effective and humane society. But I also think to try to get out of the way that people are portrayed, that if you care about community services, it means that you don't care about fighting crime. But in fact, it's the people who keep wanting to send armed police to do nonsense, like arrest someone for possession of a plant or to deal with homelessness rather than having, you know, mental health and civilian responders. Those people are actually trying to avoid fighting crime. And so this political argument has been flipped on its head. I would add we had a similar dispute about whether or not Oakland police officers could be sent to help ICE raid immigrants for being immigrants who were not hurting anyone, hadn't done anything. And Oakland police was sending cops to help ICE raid immigrants. And we had to pass a law to prohibit that. So there's a great many tasks that police are being sent to do that don't have to do with crime and violence and that do undermine our community by when we don't have those civilian resources. And I know we'll have some back and forth with the questions, so I'll close with one final example of this, which is something that we can all work on together across our city lines, which is traffic enforcement. There is a state law that restricts the ability of cities to use methods for speeding enforcement other than police. And many of our cities, including Oakland and Berkeley, have asked to engage in alternative civilian traffic response. Many of the troubling instances of police misconduct that we've seen start from a traffic stop. And so we can all continue to push for a change in state law to allow cities to have greater discretion to use alternative methods for speeding and traffic enforcement. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. I guess Vice Mayor Kaplan. I've known you for a long time. And then our last speaker is Zack Norris, who's the Executive Director of the Ella Baker Center. And why don't you wrap up for us, Zack? Wrap up the intros.
Thank you, Judy. Thanks to all the panelists. Thank you, Ashby Village. I'm Zack Norris. I'm the Executive Director, the outgoing Executive Director of the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights. We're named after Ella Baker, who was a brilliant Black woman, a leader in decades of struggle for civil rights and human rights in this country. I am also the father of two little girls. They're getting bigger. They're 9 and 11 years old. Here, raising them in East Oakland, we've had our home broken into a couple of different times. And I think that there's this idea that protecting civil rights and human rights is somehow at odds with increasing public safety. And I think nothing could be further from the truth. The first campaign that I worked on as a staff person at the Ella Baker Center was actually to close down youth prisons across the state of California. And when we started that campaign, people said, well, what will happen? You know, youth crime will go through the roof. And actually, as we were closing youth prisons, youth crime continued to decline, because when you treat people with dignity and with respect, when you hold people accountable and still hold them in community, they actually respond in ways that are much better than the criminal court system, which has really driven a cycle of poverty, violence, and incarceration. And so I hope that we definitely talk about what are some of the ways we can be addressing these challenges in our community. But I hope that we take this moment of this global pandemic to really think boldly, because prior to the pandemic, crime rates across the country were actually at historic lows, but our anxieties as a country were actually at historic highs. And that is because the architects of anxiety were doing their job of pointing to Latinx communities, Black communities, people abroad, and saying, don't trust these people, they're the problem, and scapegoating those communities. As they were, those same architects of anxiety, our past president being one of them, number 45, was actually hiding a lot of the harms that were ever present around us, from climate change, and as COVID began to come into the scene, also hiding his lack of a response to that global pandemic. And so I think it's important for us right from the beginning to distinguish between crime and harm, because there is a sort of Venn diagram between crime and harm, and there's an overlap. But crime tends to be criminalized, tends to be associated with people of color, tends to be associated with people who have been marginalized by US society since the beginning. And there's a larger suite of harms that go unaddressed, that are often caused by or contributed to by the most powerful people, from inequality to climate change, the fact that we had this global opioid epidemic that has gone largely unaccountable, unaddressed, because it's been produced by big pharma, powerful interests. We have a climate crisis that is going largely unaddressed because powerful interests continue to promote the continuation of the use of fossil fuels. So big oil, but also here locally, PG&E. We have a system that relies on power lines that have shown to be risky. And so a lot of times people talk about, well, what will happen if we make big change? But I would offer, what will happen if we continue with the status quo? This status quo is inherently risky because it prioritizes the profits of powerful people rather than the interests and the safety of all of us. And the global pandemic is just the latest example, because we gave tons of billions of dollars to Pfizer to develop and other pharmaceutical companies to develop these vaccines, but they're not sharing them around the world. And as a result, these variants continue to crop up, and we're still wearing masks. We're still seeing 2,000 people a day die because we don't have an ethos of caring. We have instead a framework of fear that serves the interest of powerful people. And unfortunately, and this is not to deny that there are good people in law enforcement. I have a number of family members that work in law enforcement, but unfortunately, law enforcement is largely doing the job of protecting this inherently risky status quo that isn't protecting most of us. And so when there's a labor strike and people are saying, hey, I'm an Amazon worker, why should I be held in my factory as a tornado barrels down on me? It's police that are largely showing up on the side of the employers rather than the side of those workers. When people are saying, don't close my schools down, we need a number of schools to stay healthy and to stay safe, it's police that are showing up on the side of the closure of schools. And the list goes on. And so what I would ask us to do is to think creatively, yes, in terms of response. So no, we shouldn't be sending the police to respond to someone who's suicidal because they're armed, and that doesn't make any sense. And no, we shouldn't be sending the police to respond to folks who are in mental health crisis, and we should have an alternative to that response. But I think that we can also understand that it isn't just those sort of low-hanging fruit, that we can also begin to think more boldly about violence itself as a public health issue, that mental health and homelessness and school discipline and some of the things that have been named so far are public health issues, and public safety really starts with public health. But violence is also a public health issue. And I've seen even in Richmond, California, where Richmond invested in this Office of Neighborhood Safety, where they invested in a trusted messenger program, they had real impact in terms of reducing violence in the city of Richmond. And that program still gets pennies on the dollar in comparison to Richmond Police Department. So what would it look like for us to not just tinker around the edges in terms of the response when people are in crisis, but actually to respond to the crisis that we are in, to actually respond holistically, transformatively to the crisis that we are in, to this inherently risky situation that puts the interest of the powerful, the small number of powerful, and those architects of anxiety, those politicians who peddle their interests and scapegoat our communities. What would it look like to actually transform that dynamic, to advance a books not bars, jobs not jails, healthcare and housing not handcuffs agenda? I think that's our call as neighbors who care about one another, to look out for each other, and to begin to build that beloved community. And this isn't an overnight thing. I understand, as someone who is in East Oakland, who deals with crime, who just last night saw sirens and someone being chased down our block in the middle of the night. I understand that crime is happening. I also understand that we can do better. And even though it isn't an overnight situation, we can begin to look towards that North Star. And just as in the context of the environmental movement, we have said we need to move away from fossil fuels that are killing us and to move towards this new energy infrastructure. I think we can similarly move away from punishment, policing, and prisons as this sort of first response, as the status quo, towards a new safety infrastructure that relies on restorative justice, that relies on community building, that relies on public health approaches to public health issues. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Norris. And so now we have about a half an hour for questions. And then, then I'm going to ask questions. And I think people have already started to put their questions in the chat. And that is the way to let me know what questions you would like to ask our panelists. So I'm going to go ahead and start with maybe some of you talked about this, but do you think you can let us know how the need for change was identified by your community or your experience. And I think I'm going to start here with Councilmember Jimenez, and then I'll go to, and then we'll make sure to hear from Oakland and Berkeley.
Thank you so much. And I think like one thing that I want to say is that how this started it has been like a lot of organizing around police accountability and reallocation of resources, as I said. One of the things that it has been as Zack mentioned, Richmond was innovated with the Office of Neighborhood Safety. And it was created when Richmond was one of the top 10 cities with the high rate of gun violence in the country. And it was created in 2007. And through the work, they helped to reduce gun violence in the city by 66%. So if you look at the statistics in 2007, gun violence, like we have like shots and killings over 207 a year. Now we are, and like as Zack said, before the pandemic, we were at the lowest because the pandemic and other issues of poverty, violence has been in the rise up. But here in Richmond, even in that, is getting up. But 2021, homicides for gun violence, and compared to 2007, it's just like, it's really a big reduction in that violence. And so that has been starting since 2006, the need for changing. So then we were advocating for the Community Police Review Commission and giving more power to them to be really doing more around police accountability. And then last year, after the killing of George Floyd, the youth, and particularly the Black and Brown community in Richmond, start organizing and mobilizing. And at Reimagine in Richmond, a community organization was created after the outrage of Mayor Tom Batts saying that we should, at one city council meeting at the last minute, saying, oh, we should just defund the police. And people felt like that was really outrageous and really not genuine. So people started getting together, and through that work, Reimagine in Richmond was able to advocate. At that time, it was 2019, I wasn't in the city council yet, or 2020, that they were able to advocate for the creation of a Reimagining Public Safety Task Force. It's a 21-member task force with the head of the police union part of that, and other people that are in mental health issues, in police reform, and people in the community who are interested in changing and looking at new alternatives. And they worked really hard for a year, and their mandate was to look at, because in 2020, there was like a deficit in the city budget. It was a deficit of like $29 million, and they were looking at like how we are going to balance a budget. And one of the things was, well, there is like, the pie is not getting bigger, and we are putting 41% of our budget into just one entity, when and another department or another program like ONS that has shown a lot of improvement in public safety was getting less than 3% of the
Thank you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, so like there is a question there that said like we don't have anything to show. We have a lot to show, and the 4 alternatives that we transfer the money, and I will be happy to talk about that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to actually ask Zack Norris if you would like to talk at all about, how Ella Baker Center for Human Rights and other groups have worked to involve the community in these efforts.
Sure. Thank you for that question. In a number of different ways. I'll give 3 examples. One is our move to move Alameda County to fund supportive programs similar to Claudia's work in Contra Costa County. I'll also lift up Night Out for Safety and Liberation, and in our prison mail night. So real quickly, we organize with parents, family members, community organizations to move $10 million roughly annually away from the Sheriff and Probation Department and towards community-based reentry supports for people dealing with the Alameda County Jail. That was important because the state had been sued as a result of overcrowding. They passed the money to counties, and these were people convicted of non-serious, non-sexual, non-violence offenses. We thought they were great candidates for non-jail solutions, and the county was just going to use those monies to continue the status quo. So people can speak up and engage their local elected officials to say, we think there's a different vision of safety that's possible that actually addresses people's needs and help them stay secure, which ultimately means they don't have to rely on underground economies or other kinds of ways to feed their families. And that was one example. We also do prison mail night monthly. We're in contact with about 8,000 currently incarcerated folks across the state of California, hundreds of volunteers. You can check us out at ellabakercenter.org to get involved in that work. And we have been able to pass laws that reduce lengthy prison sentences. We have prison sentences that are twice the international average, that are largely duplicative of 3 strikes. And we need to be bringing people home because, like in Richmond, the folks who are doing that Office of Neighborhood Safety program were people who had been through this system themselves and were trusted by largely younger people who were involved in some of the shootings, according to the Richmond Police Department and others. And so being able to bring people home who have shown they have a capacity to really help build peace in communities is going to be incredibly important. And lastly, Night Out for Safety and Liberation happens every first Tuesday in August. We're really trying to show that there's a different vision of safety and that people can get involved and engaged in it. And that is most important, not to watch your neighbors, but to really see them and to build community with them. And let's not build a suspicious society. Let's build a society where we care for one another. That event really came after the killing of Trayvon Martin by a so-called neighborhood watch captain named George Zimmerman. And we really felt like that was enough is enough. We really need to take this to the streets in a way to really put forward a different vision of community safety.
You're muted, Judy.
Sorry, I was trying to keep my dogs barking out of the conversation. Rebecca, do you think you can now speak just briefly to what's going on, to Oakland and how the community there impacted your work?
Absolutely. No, I also really agree with Zach's point about how essential that is, and the community involvement in a positive way being so important. And in Oakland, on multiple levels, it's been grassroots community involvement that has raised the level of attention that has then made it possible to pass laws. And so particularly when there is so much resistance from the chain of command, that has been a real issue. And so, you know, I want to make clear that these issues are not new, right? And that it's important that we be aware, including being aware from a perspective of what white privilege means, that police didn't start beating Black people when cell phone cameras were invented, right? But when cell phone cameras were invented, a lot more people, in particular, a lot more white people started knowing that police were beating Black people. So I do think it's important to acknowledge that the issues are not new, but the wider public awareness may be new for some. And in Oakland, there was an incident that blew up publicly around significant numbers of police officers engaged in sexual abuse of a minor. And that blowing up publicly created a level of pressure to start taking more action in terms of reforms and accountability. And ultimately, we did write a measure that we put on the ballot that did pass, creating an independent community police oversight commission. So there was a lot of grassroots pressure, but there were also issues and incidents that blew up publicly that gave that pressure the political force to enact that change.
Thank you, Councilmember Kaplan. And next, I just want to hear briefly about Berkeley. So Ms. Calavita, do you want to move
Yes.
forward?
So segueing from the citizens oversight in Oakland, I wanted to, and talking about community involvement, the Police Accountability Board in Berkeley has their meetings the second and fourth Wednesday of every month at 7 o'clock, and they're public meetings, and we hope to involve more public to come and engage. Public members can also join our subcommittees, and we encourage that, and we're hoping to do more outreach to get more involvement there. Finally, with regard to public engagement, the City Council Public Safety Committee meets the first Mondays of every month. And this is a really critical committee that makes recommendations to City Council in Berkeley. And their next meeting is February 7th at 10:30 in the morning on Monday, the 7th of February. And it could be really important for people to attend who are interested in alternatives to armed police response, because they're considering that very topic. I wanted to say also with regard to deploying resources, the city auditor in Berkeley did a report recently on calls to police in Berkeley. It turned out that 55% of those calls were on non-emergency lines, and that many on the emergency line were non-emergencies. In fact, 81% of calls to the police department were for non-criminal events like welfare checks. Checking on people's welfare. And according to the Reimagining Public Safety report that's recently come out, $6.5 million could be saved on the 30 vacant positions that are currently vacant in the police department, which could more than cover some of their recommended changes. So I just wanted to say that about resources.
Thank you so much. I see, Ms. Coulter, you have your hand up. Did you want to add something?
Yes, I do, real quick, because nobody's mentioned this Thursday's upcoming Babu settlement hearing that's happening. People want to know how they can get involved. Show up at the hearing. I wish I could post it into the chat right now. It's just a PDF flyer that I have. But the judge postponed, declaring that the consent decree to expand mental health in the jail has to be discussed more, because we put forth objections to why you should not be expanding mental health in the jail, increasing security personnel 3 times more than the therapist personnel within that jail system. So we put a halt to that. Show up to the hearing this Thursday. The National Lawyers Guild has a link to it on their, San Francisco's National Lawyers Guild has a link to it on their website, and I will send it to the Ashby Village later. That's how we can get involved. We can tell them we want the money for community services.
Thank you so much. And so I'm going to ask you guys to be brief, just because we have 10 more minutes of these questions, which I'm going to ask a couple right now, and then we want to be able to move to participants' questions. So I'm just wondering, I think most of you have talked about this, but can you just be explicit about how the new system or proposed systems work to address the needs of people with mental health challenges? And then if you can just let us know who your mental health partners are, and maybe a little bit, like, just mention what the budget is, because I think this might be our last time for our last question. So I don't know who wants to start. Rebecca, do you,
Sure, I'm happy to
Kaplan?
start. So Oakland, unlike Berkeley, does not have our own public health department. Oakland, along with all the other cities in Alameda County other than Berkeley, operates under Alameda County Public Health. And so one of the things that we've been working through as we're launching our own civilian responder program is the importance of recognizing the need for more collaboration between city and county operations, facilities, decision-making, so that we can strengthen the coordination of that work. In the meantime, however, we are not letting that stop us from getting going, and we are hiring people within the Oakland macro program to be able to handle those issues effectively and to help make sure that we have an appropriate, healthy and civilian response.
Thank you very much. And then, I don't know, maybe I can ask, maybe Councilmember Jimenez, will you talk about what's going on in Richmond?
Yeah, so we approve 4 programs. One is the creation of the Community Crisis Response Program that we set aside $1 million and is in this moment in the creation of the program, and having to coordinate with the county, which right now changed the approach and create a new mental health response with no police intervention, because before it was with police intervention. So this is exciting. But also we are through one of the other programs that we approved was to create 500 youth employment all year around. Over 400 youth had already applied, and 76 sites had already applied to host these youth. One of the things is 41 of the 76 are small businesses who has been able to use that to support. So this becomes not only a youth program, but a COVID-19 recovery for small businesses. As well, we are expanding the Office of Neighborhood Safety budget by increasing from 8 making changes personnel to add 6 more. So they will be able to deal with in the school, support the school, and support folks in our community, especially in the undocumented and the immigrant community as well. And also SOS in Richmond, which work with unhoused residents. We put $1.7 or $1.8 million for unhoused residents work. And this work has been really great, that is working with the unhoused communities, giving the voice, and also hiring within the unhoused community to help. So they have been able to hire in 30 hours part-time capacity over 16 unhoused residents in Richmond.
Thank you very much. Chief Greenwood, I'm wondering if you can speak to Berkeley. And I also was wondering if you could also touch on the mental health challenges of police officers, and what can and are we doing to address those challenges?
Thank you. Well, I think the Berkeley's longstanding system using mobile crisis team members seems to likely be on the precipice of evolving or changing, thanks to the work of others in the community that have been mentioned here. For me, that's fine. In fact, that's desirable. I think our officers would like to have more resources. So for our officers would like to have more resources that are focused and have resources and the ability to improve situations so that the officers don't need to be involved in the response. So generally, I think there's not a resistance to having others be involved in the response. The concern, and I'm going to say this knowing that it also can be kind of triggering because of what I'm about to say, but the concern is about like the safety of the other employees, both in the mental health response and in the traffic enforcement response. And I think that I did not hear much discussion as chief about those safety concerns. I appreciate that people are looking to reduce harms that come out of police interactions with people, whether it's in a mental crisis situation or in a traffic enforcement situation. But my experience, direct experience, and our experience in the profession is that, for example, traffic enforcement can be very dangerous. And so then how will the employee who's doing this enforcement, they're being potentially put in a situation of danger. And I think that's something that needs to be robustly addressed. And then for mobile crisis, I felt like I experienced people kind of scoffing when I say this, but typically for me, when we were called because of a mental health crisis, again in Berkeley, so I'm talking about local experience with well-trained officers and sometimes with mobile crisis resources, because we could use a lot more of them so that they're more available across all the days of the week and across all hours of the day. So I really appreciate the efforts to increase that resource. However, when that the fact of the matter is that when we respond to these mental folks in crisis, often the safety is the main thing that we resolve very quickly. And if you have the resources to sort of hand it off or transition from a police and mobile crisis response and take the police out of it, so you just have the mobile crisis response and hopefully more and better resources for people, I think that's a desired outcome for me personally, I think for many of our former colleagues and for those who are dealing across the profession in this area. And then I'll try to be very brief. We have focused a lot of effort on our employees who are human beings, we remember, and from training on officer-involved stress to supporting efforts in physical health, mindfulness, giving them the training, mobile crisis type training or CIT training where we can, and that's an effort that needs to be expanded also, so that they have the tools, the experience to effectively respond to these issues. I will say I wish I had it when I was, a young cop on the street, because looking back, there were times when I was dealing with mental health issues, but I did not have enough of an education to give me the level of mindfulness and awareness that would have allowed me to be kind of more effective in responding to those. Quite frankly, today's officers are getting much more training and there can always be more. So I think it's very important that we support our officers in their own health, physical and psychological health, and that we, in this discussion and the evolution about dealing with mental health issues, that we increase, not decrease, the amount of training that officers have. Because ultimately, officers have to respond to issues that involve safety or violence. And we want those officers to have that training on board. And the resources for training officers is not sufficient. I mean, Alameda County's 40-hour mental health training is that program expanded would be great, because we sent officers whenever there were openings. But really, there's only openings 1 or 2 every few months, and you've got 130 officers. But our CIT trained officers who had the benefit of that week's training really appreciate it. And I think that's what has led culturally and historically to the police department's lower reliance on force to resolve calls for service. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Greenwood. And so now I'm going to turn to some of the questions, and people have been posting a lot of questions. So I'm just going to pick some. The first one that I'm choosing is for Claudia Jimenez. And it says, today Mayor Tombat said that there's nothing to show for the money that the city council redirected from the police department to other programs, and that there's no accountability. What's your response to this?
Well, first of all, it's no a secret that he has been one of the city council members who has been against this, and he has been, and it's really sad that he has been attacking and in collaboration with the Richmond Police Association has been giving some really misleading information and attacking the reimagining public safety task force members who have been working really hard to make these changes happen and become a reality. I can say that we have a lot to show, like 500 youth programs all year round created. Over 400 youth have been applied and are working. And some of them in this COVID-19 has been the only source of income in their houses. Over 76 nonprofits and small businesses have applied. As I said, 41 small businesses in Richmond have been getting these youth working there. And it has been tremendously, because right now with the workers, like there is no a lot of workers that wants to work, or in some of these jobs have for the small business having the opportunity to get these youth has been a tremendous financial support for them. So as I said before, this has not only be a youth program, but also a COVID-19 recovery. We are getting, we are just passing and approve few city councils meetings, the budget for ONS, so increasing that. Can you imagine, they were 8 workers and now they are going to be almost double 6 more, who have been doing a lot of great work. With ONS, we had been able to, like, they had been able, like, I know homeless issues is a really big issues, and we have been criticizing for, you know, like what we are doing, but in terms of like what SOS has been doing with the money that was putting aside for that has been really great. Opened opportunities for unhoused residents to be able to get jobs. And the last thing is that even though the community crisis response, mental health response is not up, is in the making, and I think that is going to be a great thing for our community. And with that, what we are saying is that we are putting more boots on the street to enhance public safety for everybody in Richmond, not for few, but for everybody, and from folks who have been not able to rely on the police as others has done it before. So I think this is important, and I think like we are making more into making the police more accountable and supporting in trainings. And it's not just like we had the police or not the police, it's like what else we can do so that we enhance public safety, because the response that we have right now is not adequate for many things that we need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Council Member. And I wanted to say to everybody that I would like to be able to share the chat with people, but I forgot to ask permission. So if you have any concerns about us sharing your chat, can you please let me know on the chat, and I will, then we won't publish it. But otherwise, I'd like to make this available for everybody because there's a great conversation and I'm not going to get a chance to get to a lot of the questions. There's also people, different panelists have posted some resources. So here's another question. And I'm actually going to focus this one on Berkeley and Oakland, since we just heard from Richmond. So what about police culture? For instance, police use the word tool to mean one of their weapons. In other ways, their language minimizes acknowledgement that they too use violence. Is it realistic to think that the police culture can be shifted towards a more expansive perspective on community safety? So I'd love to actually start with Chief Greenwood, and then if we can move from there to maybe Rebecca, you can respond. I mean, Councilmember Kaplan.
On the first part, the cultural issue of language, you know, I think that I guess I'm going to speak again from my perspective. The desire to have a highly professional trained workforce carries with it some language. And I think that officers are aware that their tools are weapons. I don't know that at all that officers talk about weapons using only the word tool. That might be kind of an external understanding. I think that it's helpful when officers do say, when an executive discusses weapons, that can be, I think, can be triggering, which I understand, but also then creates like a resistance to listening to what's going on. For example, I would say, the availability of weapons or tools other than a firearm is absolutely related to lesser uses of force and fewer harms. If you have ways where you have to take someone into custody, you want all the tools or weapons, if you're going to call them weapons, you want to have a variety of tools or weapons which create the least amount of harm necessary. So it's that's an interesting. I feel like I sort of get the question. Tool or weapon. The bottom line is the professionalism, the use of force policy that governs their use, and what the track record is of how they're used and how much harms they may perhaps create in your local agency. So that's that. And then the second part was about. Could you give that to me again? I'll try to be brief in my response.
Gosh, I'm sorry, because I just went out of that question. So maybe somebody else can help. I'm sorry, I can't find the question.
I don't remember.
I think it might have been how to change the culture. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I think how to change or evolve the culture has to do with what the organization puts forth as its mission, what it says to its own people about what they're doing and why, and what those values are. And that's something that we strove for from late 2016 on, with a mission and vision and values statement, which is a public thing, which I believe in 100%, and that our staff worked on for 3 days to put that together as a reflection of our department. And then the other piece of that is it can't be cynical. Like, I believe it, I valued it. I tried to talk about it whenever I could, and there could always be more of that. But you sort of have to take a stand, and then internally you have to keep returning to that. You have to show your dedication to those principles, and you have to have those unfold in real time in the way that you run the organization, the way that you praise officers for their good work, or the way that you correct officers if there's an issue where they're, if there's a misconduct issue, the way you're guiding them. So I think sticking to important principles, and for people on this call, there is a idea called procedural justice that basically talks about how by using certain principles, police officers will tend to be involved in fewer harms to people in their interactions with people. And that has to do with an emphasis and training on treating people with respect, giving them dignity, being neutral and figuring out what's going on in the situation, and being transparent about what you're doing. And the studies have shown from that if you treat your people, if the officers treat community members, their fellow human beings, with those in mind, they're going to get outcomes that are less harmful and that are more cooperative. And that's a plus for officers and for community members. Then we focus that internally the same way. Is the police administration staff treating its employees the same way, with dignity, respect, with neutrality in investigating, and with transparency? And I would put it forth that the most effective if your desire is to affect the culture of your police department, it's relationships, it's knowing people, and it's also in public using those same principles. I think that people in a police department are going to sort of attach more meaning when they feel that they're being treated with dignity, they're being treated with respect, that somebody who's investigating fact-finding is neutral in their approach, and there's transparency and progress, which I really hope is part of the PABs, the new PABs, the way it goes forward. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And Rebecca, did you want to add anything?
Yes, I think it is important to acknowledge that there is a fundamental structural problem as well. And it's not only a matter of individual good people and individual bad people, but that, as has been said, that power corrupts and that you get the level of behavior depending on what accountability you have, right? And so if 32 men who were all members of some hockey league had all raped a minor, they wouldn't all not have been punished for it, right? And so when a structure is created that creates a lack of accountability and that creates the ability to get away with misconduct, then that tends to be self-perpetuating. And one of the things that came out of a recent study of discipline within the Oakland Police Department is that the higher ranking members of the department were less likely to be disciplined even when they committed the same or worse conduct, and that African-American officers were more likely to be disciplined than white officers for the same conduct. So if you have a structure that allows for the misconduct to have no response and creates disparities in that response, then that perpetuates the problem.
Thank you so much. I just noticed that a former colleague of me and a brilliant person is now on the Richmond Public Safety Task Force. And so I'm actually going to ask Deborah Small if you can just, you said you had 3 things that you wanted to, or 2 issues you'd like to raise with the panel. Can you go ahead and, I don't see what they are on here, but maybe you can just, are you able to speak? Can we give access to Deborah Small to maybe be able to speak? Ugh, it looks like we can't. So I'm sorry, Deborah, I can't see the issues that you wanted to raise for the panel. So I'm very sorry about that, but I was going to call on you. So I guess I will move to another question, which was, you know, a couple of you have mentioned, I think this is good to close on, that a couple of you have mentioned how the public can kind of get involved by showing up for meetings or showing up for like panels or even in different contexts. And this question is, please explain how the public makes a difference in addition to showing up for meetings. So I guess it's, if you can give people some ideas of ways that they can have impact on this.
I can take that question.
Okay.
I think the reality is that when we talk about changing the culture of the police, we're talking about the necessity of changing the culture of the larger society. And we unfortunately still live in a white supremacist society. And in that sense, the professionalization and the institutionalization of the police can actually be part of the problem, because what we have is powerful police unions who hold on to that power in ways that replicate and reinforce white supremacy. And so an interim step in terms of changing the culture of police was proposed by Mike McBride with Live Free, to say that if you go on to social media and post about white supremacists, if you belong to a white supremacist group, you should not be allowed to be a part of a police department, which you would think was a sort of like, oh, duh, obviously, but that is not the law currently. And so that's like one example of, and I say that because we are all involved in this culture and we can all work to really change the orientation of that culture through changing the metrics. And that's one thing I wanted to add to Claudia's response is, it's curious to me that when community-based organizations come into doing public safety work, they're immediately bombarded with, where are your metrics? Can you prove what impact you've had? Whereas the status quo doesn't get those same questions, even though we have ongoing cycles of poverty, violence, and incarceration. In the context of the juvenile justice system, the #1 predictor of someone going into the adult prison system is whether or not they've been involved with the juvenile injustice system. And yet when people propose alternatives to dealing with young people who have been involved with the system, they're immediately met with these questions. And so I think as people who are concerned, you can be pushing your elected officials to say, no, we want to give the breathing room for these programs to work. We don't want you to immediately be, demanding that they have a 16-point PowerPoint presentation with all of their metrics and efficacy. We understand that the status quo is not serving us, and we actually believe that it's the elected officials that need to be held accountable first and foremost. And that's one of the things that I've seen, that I think we've seen in these past 5 years or so, is that we have a society that is not holding the most powerful accountable. And that's why I think things like restorative justice are really important, because it isn't just about society like, giving a pass to people. It's actually about building the community muscle to hold people accountable while still holding them in community, which is really important if we are going to hold elected officials accountable. So people can be involved in doing the work of restorative justice and in pushing our elected officials to have a different vision of safety.
Thanks, Zach. So I just want to see if anyone else, like from, I don't know, maybe one of the electeds might want to respond to what Mr. Norris just said, or anything. Oh, go ahead, Councilmember Jimenez.
Yeah, thank you, Zach, for saying that. I think like it's important to recognize that it's both, like that the metrics for all these programs, people have it, as I said before, but also if we want all police accountability, we have to be able for the police to get all the information that is needed, no the one that they are collecting, but if there is more that is needed, that they are make some efforts to collect that information. For instance, like we, the community, the request for information to get police use of force in Richmond. And we got the data, and then through an analysis, the community published that data, and now, which was just kind of like the data that the police department gave to us and to the community. And then now they are attacking this data because they say, oh, it's not like it is. And we have been asking over and over to give us the data so we can make the analysis and make that publicly. So far, we haven't done it. We had the police department and other departments hasn't released, and Richmond, I will say, Richmond has been one of the few has actually get that data out, but it was after we had to be sued by the East Mercury News to get the data, and they found like the canine issues of police dog bites.
Councilmember Jimenez, it's noon, so I need to.
Okay.
wrap
Okay,
this up.
so again, what I wanted to wrap up is that yes, it's important to have the metrics, but to hold every part at the same level, because if not, it doesn't work. It just works for one part, and then if you have that for just one part, then you are going to be attacked and get the why just for one part.
Thank you so much. And I think Chief Greenwood, you use this expression, but somebody asked what CIT means.
Right. Crisis intervention training.
Great.
It's based on a model that came out of Memphis and is used lots of places now.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank our panelists, and our participants, but I really want to thank our panelists, all of whom play a really important role in our communities, for participating in this and engaging so fully. And I feel like we could talk for 2 more hours, but we are supposed to end because it's noon. So I'm going to close this up, and just let me know if there's anything else that you really want to say. Okay, seeing no hands, I'm going to wrap this up with a broad thank you and good luck with our work.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
you.